when you feel a deep moral obligation, like, say, that absolute unshakable conviction that cruelty against an innocent person is just objectively wrong, where does that feeling actually come from?
Oh, man, that's the big one, isn't it?
Right, because, stop and really think about it for a second. It doesn't feel like a mild preference.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Like, it's not like preferring chocolate over vanilla. It arrives with this kind of heavy, demanding authority. Like, it actually demands something of you.
It's one of the most profound questions we can ask about our own existence, I think. Because like you said, that feeling of moral conviction, it isn't passive. It feels like an external law just sort of bearing down on your conscience.
Exactly. It feels like a fundamental law of the universe.
Right. It commands you to act or, to refrain from acting. Totally, regardless of what you personally desire in that moment.
Yeah, but then you zoom out, right? You read a little bit of modern evolutionary biology, you look at neuroscience, and you start to wonder about the mechanics behind that feeling.
The actual machinery.
Yeah. Right. Like, is that deep-seated conscience just a really useful biological trick? Is my profound sense of justice actually just some ancient survival mechanism?
Just something that helped our primate ancestors cooperate so they wouldn't starve or get eaten on the savannah.
Yes. Or, and this is the flip side, is it pointing to an actual reality outside of myself?
Well, what you're describing there is, honestly, the absolute central tension of modern intellectual life.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah, because we've developed these incredibly sophisticated scientific accounts of human behavior, right? We can map the brain. We can trace the evolutionary lineage of certain social behaviors.
But those biological accounts kind of leave us hanging.
Exactly. They leave us in a void when it comes to figuring out why those behaviors carry any moral weight today. I mean, if a behavioral trait is just a survival mechanism built into us by blind natural selection.
Why should it dictate how you or I live our lives right now?
Precisely. Why does it matter today?
So that is exactly the tension we are jumping into today. We're taking a deep dive into a really fascinating text called From Adaptation to Ontology.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And it uses the work of behavioral scientist Gad Saad, specifically his brand of evolutionary realism, as a springboard to ask that ultimate question. Not just how human nature evolved, but why human nature has any moral authority over us at all.
Right. And what makes this particular exploration so compelling, for me at least, is that the essay doesn't take the easy route.
The easy route being like just rejecting the science.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't ignore biology. It fully embraces evolutionary biology, but then it pushes past the boundaries of that biology into classical philosophy. It's trying to bridge this massive gap between evolutionary adaptation and ontological reality.
And then just for you listening, ontology is just the philosophical study of being, right? Like what fundamentally exists and what things are at their very core.
Spot on. It's a massive conceptual shift. You go from seeing yourself merely as a product of blind physical processes.
Just a meat machine, basically.
Right, a meat machine, to seeing yourself as a participant in this deeply ordered reality.
Okay, I am so ready to pull this apart. But let's start with the groundwork that the essay lays down using Gad Saad's work. Because, before we get to the high-level philosophy, we have to talk about the actual meat and bones of human nature.
Yeah, we have to start with the physical reality.
Right, and the essay gives a lot of credit to Saad for pushing back against one very specific modern idea.
The core premise of Saad's worldview, at least as the text details it, is that reality pushes back. He spent his entire career arguing against the blank slate theory of human nature.
That's the idea that we're all born as, empty hard drives, right?
Yeah, the idea that everything we think or feel or desire is just programmed into us by our culture or our parents or society.
Just totally socially constructed.
Right. And Saad argues, and the essay strongly affirms this, by the way, that the blank slate theory is fundamentally unserious. It's biologically illiterate.
Oh, wow. Biologically illiterate. That's a strong phrase.
It is, but it fits. We are embodied organisms. We have a deeply evolved psychological architecture. Our minds bear the heavy, indelible imprint of our entire evolutionary history.
Okay, I want to make sure we ground this in reality for everyone listening. When we say evolved psychological architecture, we aren't just talking about basic reflexes, right? Like pulling your hand away from a hot stove.
Oh, no. We're talking about complex emotional and social software, stuff that comes pre-installed.
So structured dispositions.
Exactly. Inclinations that were shaped over vast stretches of time because they conferred some kind of reproductive or survival advantage. The text specifically highlights things like fear, jealousy, parental attachment, status seeking.
Even the perception of beauty, right?
Yes, the perception of beauty and even the human pull toward the sacred.
Wait, really? So when I feel, I don't know, a sudden spike of jealousy or this intense protective instinct over my kid, I'm not feeling that just because society taught me to.
Not at all. You're feeling it because millions of years of evolutionary pressure selected for ancestors who had those exact responses.
And they pass those genes down.
Exactly. Those traits are common human endowments. They pop up in every single society across every epoch of history because they're rooted in the biological reality of what we are.
Rather than just what some group of people decided to construct culturally. Okay, that makes total sense. But the text mentions that Saad uses this scientific realism to diagnose what he calls idea pathogens.
Yes, idea pathogens. It's a fascinating concept.
How does a biological framework lead you to diagnosing bad ideas?
Well, think about what a literal biological pathogen does. A virus enters a host, hijacks the cellular machinery, completely bypasses the immune system, and eventually degrades the health of the organism.
Right, it makes you sick.
Saad argues that certain ideas act in the exact same way on the human mind. They are literal cognitive viruses.
So they propagate through populations like a sickness.
Exactly. They spread, they evade rational scrutiny by, playing on our emotions, and they actively degrade the cognitive health of the people who hold them.
But why are they considered pathogens exactly? Like, what makes an idea sick in this specific framework?
Because they completely ignore biological realities in favor of ideological trends.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so when an ideology demands that you pretend human beings don't have an evolved nature, or it demands that you ignore basic biological facts to fit some kind of political narrative, it forces the mind to constantly fight against reality.
The essay uses extreme identity politics and the outright denial of human nature as examples of these pathogens. And I want to pause here and be really clear for you listening. We aren't bringing this up to endorse any specific political critique.
Right, absolutely.
We're just impartially reporting what's in the text. The author's argument here is that building a philosophy that denies evolved biological constraints is it's like trying to build an airplane while denying the existence of gravity.
That's like a perfect analogy.
We just need to map out how the author views these pathogens to understand the rest of the text. The core argument is that nature imposes constraints, and pretending those constraints don't exist invites decay.
And that is a crucial distinction, because the essay holds a profound respect for Saad's scientific realism. It absolutely agrees that a culture that understands that nature imposes real boundaries would be spared a massive amount of confusion and suffering.
But, and this feels like the massive pivot in the text, the essay argues that this evolutionary realism has an inherent fatal limit when it comes to morality.
It does. And the limit isn't that the science is wrong, by the way.
Right.
The limit is that the science can only explain the how, not the why.
The how versus the why.
Right. Evolution is a brilliant explanatory theory of mechanism. It tells us exactly how useful traits were retained and how useless ones were discarded. It explains the historical assembly of the human animal.
But an account of how a thing came to be cannot automatically serve as an account of why that thing should command my moral allegiance today.
Let's actually look at the mechanics of that. Let's take cooperation as an example. Evolutionary biologists can easily explain that cooperation was biologically advantageous for human ancestors. The tribes that learned to cooperate, share food, protect each other, they survived and reproduced.
Well, the tribes that were entirely selfish just splintered and died out.
Exactly. So the evolutionary consensus is that cooperation is a very successful survival strategy.
Okay, I follow that. But where's the problem?
The essay points out a massive philosophical problem. Biological advantage is not a synonym for moral goodness.
Wait, I need to stop you there, because I feel like a critic could easily say, of course it does. If it keeps the species alive, it's good. End of story. How is biological advantage not the exact same thing as moral goodness?
Because evolutionary mechanisms are completely silent regarding the moral authority of the dispositions they produce. Evolution only cares about reproductive fitness, period. Getting your genes into the next generation.
Just survival and replication.
Right. Let's take a darker example to illustrate this. Let's look at in-group versus out-group aggression.
So, like tribal warfare.
Yes. A purely evolutionary ethic can argue that in-group aggression, so murdering members of your own tribe, is maladaptive. It hurts your tribe's chances of survival.
Right, so evolution selects against it.
Exactly. But what happens when out-group aggression, say attacking a neighboring tribe, stealing all their resources and wiping them out, What if that is actually highly adaptive?
Oh.
What if it massively increases your tribe's reproductive success?
Wow, okay, I see the problem now. If morality is just what helps us survive, then in that specific scenario, wiping out the neighboring tribe isn't just biologically useful. It actually becomes morally right.
Precisely. If a behavioral trait is just a survival mechanism, whence comes its binding authority over your conscience today?
You can't just say it's wrong because it hurts our survival, because history is full of examples where brutality actively helped a group survive.
Exactly. Saad's cultural criticism silently presupposes that truth is better than falsehood, and that cooperation is morally superior to conquest.
But his own scientific framework doesn't actually provide the foundation for that presupposition.
No, it doesn't. Because evolution doesn't select for moral goodness. It selects for fitness.
This fundamentally changes how I have to view this whole thing. It sounds like, okay, think about it like this. Evolutionary psychology gives us a highly detailed blueprint of a house.
Okay, I like that.
It tells us exactly where the load-bearing walls are, where the plumbing goes, and how the house was constructed over millions of years. And that's incredibly useful information.
It is.
But a blueprint can't tell you why the house was built in the first place. It doesn't tell you who is supposed to live there or why you have a deep, objective moral obligation not to burn it down.
That is an excellent analogy. Science, at its absolute finest, describes the furniture of the physical world and the historical history of its assembly. It gives us the blueprint.
But you can't observe an ought under a microscope.
No, you cannot measure a moral obligation with a caliper or, an fMRI scan.
So the blueprint is essential, but it's just not enough, which leads us to a much bigger question. If evolution is just the mechanism of construction, what kind of environment allowed that mechanism to work in the first place?
Right, because it didn't happen in a vacuum.
Exactly, and the essay addresses this by flipping a very common script about how we view the universe.
Yeah, this is the fascinating part of the text. We usually talk about natural selection as this sort of great craftsman of life. We view it as an engine that somehow conjured structure and complexity out of total chaos.
Like it just pulled order out of nothing. But the text argues that evolution actually presupposes an order that it did not create. It requires a stable workshop, so to speak, to do its crafting.
Yes.
What does that mean mechanically? Like, how does that actually work?
Well, think about what natural selection actually requires to function at all. It requires a stable, intelligible, law-governed cosmos.
It needs reliable rules.
Exactly. It requires a universe where the same physical causes reliably produce the same physical effects. I mean, if the laws of physics changed every Tuesday...
Right. If gravity just reversed, or if the molecular structure of water randomly shifted.
No biological trait could ever be consistently advantageous. There would be nothing stable to adapt to.
Because you can't evolve a wing to fly if the atmosphere's density is constantly randomizing.
Exactly. Evolution needs reliable gravity, reliable chemistry, a reliable molecular order, just for DNA to even exist and replicate.
Therefore, the essay argues the intelligible, rational structure of the world is not the output of the evolutionary process.
No, it is the absolute precondition for it. Reality has to be ordered and structured long before any biological organism ever arrives on the scene to be shaped by it.
Okay, so the universe comes preloaded with order. But how does our evolved brain actually relate to that order? Because the text draws this incredibly stark contrast between the evolutionary drive for reproductive fitness on one hand and the human pursuit of objective truth on the other.
Right. Where do they overlap and where do they fall apart? Well, the essay is actually very fair to the pure materialists here. It concedes to naturalists. So think of evolutionary biologists like Richard Dawkins or Steven Pinker.
Okay, sure.
It concedes that in the middle-sized physical world, evolutionary fitness strictly tracks with objective truth.
Give me an example of the middle-sized physical world. What does that mean?
It just means navigating your immediate physical environment. So if you misperceive a 100-foot cliff as a soft, grassy meadow...
You step off, you die, and you definitely do not pass on your genes.
Exactly.
Or, if you mistake a hungry tiger for a potential mate, you are eaten long before you can breed.
Right. So in this physical domain, judging the trajectory of a thrown stone, recognizing physical danger, identifying food natural selection, absolutely pressures our sensory faculties toward truth.
Because mistakes are literally lethal.
Yes. We can trust our eyes and ears in these scenarios because biological survival directly depends on an accurate mapping of physical reality.
But the text says this overlap is extremely limited. So what happens when we leave the physical domain? Like, what happens when we push into abstract mathematics or high-level metaphysics or deep moral philosophy?
This is where evolutionary fitness and objective truth completely break apart.
Really? How so?
In those highly abstract domains, the evolutionary pressure toward accuracy just vanishes. Why? Because having a perfectly accurate view of the cosmos doesn't necessarily pay out in reproductive success.
Wait.
In fact, a comforting delusion might serve your survival far better than a cold, austere truth.
Hold on, I need to wrap my head around that. How could a delusion like a literally false belief actually give a group a survival advantage?
Let's go back to the example of a tribe going to war.
Yeah.
Imagine two tribes competing for the exact same territory. Tribe A has a deeply realistic, objective view of the universe.
Okay.
They know they are just biological organisms on a rock, and they know that violence is statistically risky and essentially meaningless.
So they have the objective truth.
Yes. Now look at Tribe B. Tribe B is possessed by a massive delusion. They believe they're the chosen people of a supreme war deity. They believe their enemies are literally subhuman demons.
Oh, wow.
And they believe that dying in battle guarantees them eternal paradise.
So from a purely objective standpoint, Tribe B is living a complete and total lie.
But look at the behavioral output of that lie. That comforting delusion is spectacularly fitness-enhancing.
Because it binds the coalition together.
Exactly. It binds them with unbreakable loyalty. It flatters the believers. It steels them for violent conflict. Tribe B is going to fight with absolute fearless ferocity. They are going to completely wipe out Tribe A.
So evolution actively rewards the belief precisely because it is false but useful. The falsehood mobilizes the pride better than the cold truth would.
Exactly. Here, truth and survival actively oppose one another, and evolution selects for the delusion.
Think about this for a second if you're listening. This is the nihilism trap for the pure naturalist. If our brains are ultimately just pattern-finding survival engines designed over millions of years just to keep us alive long enough to reproduce, aren't we pulling a fast one on ourselves by trusting them to do high-level philosophy?
Right. The honest naturalist deeply struggles with this.
I mean, if natural selection routinely rewards lies that help us survive, how can you trust your own brain when you ponder the meaning of life or objective morality?
You really can't. If you press the purely evolutionary account to its absolute limits, you can easily ground our confidence in perceiving a physical cliff. But you cannot ground our confidence in the belief that cruelty is universally wrong or that the cosmos is truly intelligible.
Because if truth in these deep domains is defined merely as whatever helps us survive, then truth just loses all objective meaning. Truth has to be a standard independent of survival.
Exactly.
So we have this massive chasm here. On one side, we have biological facts descriptions of what helps us survive, even if it's a lie. Right, the is. On the other side, we have moral obligations, prescriptions of what we ought to do, regardless of survival. How do we cross that chasm? Because right now, they seem entirely disconnected.
To understand how to cross it, we first have to understand why this chasm is so famous in philosophy. It's known as the is-ought problem.
Ah, the is-ought problem.
Yes, most famously articulated by the Scottish philosopher David Hume in the 18th century.
Okay, explain this to me like I'm 5. What exactly is the is-ought problem?
Hume noticed that a lot of thinkers would start by describing facts about the world, how things are.
Okay.
But then suddenly, without warning, they would start making claims about how people ought to behave without ever explaining how they jump from the factual description to the moral prescription.
So you can't just get an ought from an is. Just because something is a certain way doesn't automatically mean it ought to be that way.
Precisely. Let's use an evolutionary example. You can observe the biological fact that human males have a statistical disposition toward physical aggression. That is an is. It's a descriptive biological fact.
Right.
But you cannot logically look at that fact and conclude, therefore, human males ought to be aggressive. There is a massive logical leap there that you simply aren't allowed to make.
Because science gives us the is. It describes the furniture of the world, like you said, but it cannot tell us how the furniture ought to be arranged.
Exactly.
It feels like an impossible trap. If science can only give us is, and morality inherently requires ought, how does the essay solve this?
The essay argues that the is-ought gap only actually exists if you view human nature as a bare fact.
A bare fact, meaning what?
Meaning a random contingent bundle of traits that natural selection just happened to blindly assemble over time. If we were just a random pile of evolutionary accidents, like, I don't know, a pile of sand blown together by the wind.
Then Hume is right.
Yes, you cannot derive any moral obligation from a random pile of sand.
But I feel a really big but coming here.
But if human nature has teleology, the gap vanishes completely.
Teleology. Okay, let's unpack this word, because this is the bridge we've been looking for. Teleology is the philosophical study of ends, right? Purposes or final pauses. It's the idea that things have an intrinsic design or a built-in goal.
Yes. And to understand how teleology bridges the gap between a biological fact and a moral duty, we really need to dive into the essay's watch analogy. It is brilliant in its simplicity.
Oh, I love this analogy. Walk us through it. Let's look at the mechanics of a watch.
Imagine a mechanical pocket watch. If I want to describe to you what this watch is, the bare physical facts of it, I have to describe its gears, its spring, its glass face, its metal casing.
Right, that's the purely factual description.
But here's the crucial point. I cannot fully describe what a watch is without including what it is for. Its final cause, its purpose.
Because a watch is for keeping time. That is its teleology.
Exactly.
You literally can't explain what a gear is doing without explaining that the gear exists to move the hands to tell the time.
Right. The purpose is completely inseparable from the physical description. The teleology is baked into the ontology, into the very being of the thing itself.
And because that purpose is baked into the is, an evaluative conclusion automatically, logically follows.
Yes.
How so? Like, break that down.
Think about a watch that has completely rusted gears and just fails to keep time. It isn't just different from a working watch. It is objectively, factually a bad watch.
Oh, wow. The value judgment, the word bad, is baked right into the physical description.
Exactly. You didn't have to import some outside subjective moral rule to say it was bad. The ought was resident in the is from the very start.
Because a watch ought to keep time by virtue of what it is.
Yes. The text argues that in the case of the watch, no logical fallacy is ever committed because no gap was ever crossed. The value is totally internal to the fact.
But hold on. I can see how this works perfectly for a watch. A watch was explicitly designed by a human watchmaker for a specific task. Human beings are a little bit more complex. How does this apply to us? Who defines the human purpose?
This is where classical philosophy differs so radically from modern materialism. The classical account, which the essay fiercely defends, argues that human nature is not a bare fact. It is in essence constituted by a final cause.
Meaning to be human is to be for something, just as a watch is for keeping time.
Precisely.
And what does the text suggest that purpose is?
It suggests our nature is rationally ordered toward very specific ends, toward knowing the truth, toward deep communion with others, and toward the good. We have an actual ontological blueprint.
So if I'm tracking this correctly, if human beings have a baked-in teleology aimed at truth and goodness, then acting against those ends isn't just breaking some arbitrary social contract we all made up.
Correct. When you commit an act of cruelty or cowardice or willful deception, you aren't just violating a cultural norm that we all agreed upon for convenience. You are committing an objective error against your own being.
It is exactly like the watch failing to keep time.
Exactly. You are failing at being the kind of creature you actually are.
Let's bring this down to earth for a second. Think about a really high-end tool. If I take a $20,000 Rolex and I use it to hammer a rusty nail into a wooden board, I am violently violating its teleology.
You're completely destroying it.
Right. I am physically misusing its essence. I might actually succeed in driving the nail in, but I'm going to completely destroy the watch in the process.
That is a perfect encapsulation of the idea.
So the argument here is that when we lie to ourselves or when we act maliciously towards someone else, we are basically using a Rolex to hammer a nail. We are violating our own ontological blueprint. We are grinding our own gears to dust.
And that is exactly how ontological essences provide the absolute moral authority that biological evolution lacks.
Because evolution can only say, well, cruelty might be costly to your survival, so it's statistically risky.
Right, but ontology says cruelty fundamentally deforms the kind of creature you are. It hollows you out. It is a much deeper, much more binding authority. The ought is found right in the blueprint of the is.
That fundamentally changes how I view my own choices, like entirely. But it does leave a massive lingering question for me.
What's that?
Well, if humans have this baked-in design, this teleology aimed at discovering objective truth, how does our physical mind actually connect with the deep structure of reality? I mean, how do we know the truth is actually out there to be grasped in the first place?
That is the next leap in the text. We have to look at the universe itself to answer that. And it requires us to completely rethink what the human mind actually is.
Because evolutionary psychology often describes the mind as just nothing more than a biological information processing organ, like a computer made of meat, right? Evolved purely to solve adaptive problems on the savannah.
Right, just neurons firing, chemical receptors receiving inputs.
But the essay argues that this leaves out a crucial, glaring piece of the puzzle.
It does. It forces us to ask, what actually is information?
Well, in a computer, it's just ones and zeros. In a brain, it's electrical impulses.
But the physical impulse isn't the information itself.
Wait, what do you mean?
Information is not matter. It is not energy. Information is form. It is pattern, structure, intelligible meaning. And here is the absolute key concept the essay brings up. Information is substrate independent.
Substrate independent. Okay, let's ELI5 this. A substrate is just the underlying material something is built on, right?
Right.
So what does it mean that information is independent of its material?
Think about the concept of justice, or even simpler, a mathematical equation like 2 + 2 = 4.
Okay.
That exact same information can be inscribed in ink on a piece of paper. It can be represented by microscopic silicon gates opening and closing in a computer processor. Or it can be carried by a complex web of neural firings in your physical brain.
Right. Ink, silicon, neurons, 3 completely different physical materials.
But the information, the actual meaning, is identical across all 3. The information itself is indifferent to its physical medium because it is formal, not material.
Oh, wow.
And the text argues that form always presupposes intelligibility. It fundamentally requires a mind to grasp it. A structure only counts as information if it can be understood. Your brain doesn't just shuffle physical symbols around in the dark. Your mind actually grasps the meaning behind them.
But wait, a skeptic could definitely push back here. A modern secular reader might listen to this and say, sure, the universe has physical regularities. Planets orbit, apples fall, and our brain is a great pattern-finding engine that evolved to map those regularities, but the order or the meaning is just in our heads.
Right, the idea that we project the math onto the blank canvas of space.
Exactly. They'd say the universe itself isn't thoughtful or rational, only the human thinker is.
That is the standard materialist objection, for sure. We invent the math to describe the chaos. But the text dislodges this objection with a really profound realization about the nature of mathematics itself.
Which is?
Mathematics is discovered, not invented.
Oh, man. I want to spend some time here because the distinction between discovering math and inventing math is staggering once you actually see it.
It really is.
If math were just a human projection, like a convenient tool we invented, like the hammer or the wheel, we could just revise it whenever we wanted. It wouldn't answer to anything outside of ourselves.
Exactly. If you invent a game, you can change the rules of the game. But mathematicians do not experience their work as invention. They labor against intense objective resistance.
They are constantly corrected by proofs they didn't even want to find.
Yes. They stumble upon objective truths like the distribution of prime numbers or the properties of a Mandelbrot set that hold true universally, whether any human mind is thinking about them or not.
Prime numbers are such a great example of this. No human invented the fact that 17 is prime. The universe already knew that.
Okay.
Like cicadas use prime number life cycles, 13 or 17 years, to avoid predator population booms. The math was structuring biology millions of years before humans even existed.
And the text gives a truly incredible historical example of this phenomenon, the discovery of non-Euclidean geometry.
Walk us through the history of this because it beautifully illustrates the point.
So for thousands of years, Euclidean geometry, which is the geometry of flat surfaces you learn in high school, was considered the only possible geometry.
Right.
But in the 19th century, mathematicians like Gauss, Lobachevsky, and Riemann started playing with the foundational postulates. They asked, what if space isn't flat? What if it's curved?
They were just doing pure theoretical thought experiments.
Pure abstraction. They developed these incredibly complex, bizarre mathematical structures for curved spaces. And at the time, these non-Euclidean geometries were seen as pure, formal curiosities.
Like, they were brilliant, but they had absolutely no known application to the real world. Everyone thought physical space was strictly Euclidean.
Exactly. It was just math nerds playing with numbers in a vacuum. A beautiful mental game, but physically useless.
But then...
But fast forward several decades. Albert Einstein is trying to formulate his theory of general relativity.
Okay.
He realizes that gravity isn't just a force pulling things together. It is a curvature in the fabric of space-time itself. But he doesn't have the math to describe it.
Until he looks back at what Riemann was doing 60 years earlier.
Yes. Einstein discovered that these exact, purely abstract, non-Euclidean geometries, invented for no practical reason whatsoever, perfectly describe the physical macroscopic reality of gravitation and the curvature of the universe.
Think about the sheer improbability of that. The math predicted the physical structure of the universe decades before we even knew the universe looked like that.
Which proves the point.
Yeah.
The rational structure was already in the world, waiting, before any human brain evolved to read it. The universe was speaking a highly complex mathematical language long before we ever learned to translate it.
It's like exploring a completely untouched, ancient, primeval forest and suddenly discovering a fully functioning, high-speed Wi-Fi network completely hidden in the trees.
That's a great image.
The signal was already there, pulsing through the woods. We just finally evolved a biological receiver, our brains capable of picking it up. But the pure naturalist is left with an inescapable question. Who set up the router in the first place?
Right. If the deep architecture of the cosmos is profoundly rational and mathematical prior to any human observation, then intelligibility isn't something humans project onto brute matter.
It is a fundamental property of reality itself.
Yes. And as the classical philosophers noted, rationality cannot arise from the non-rational. Thought cannot come from the thoughtless.
Which points directly to a very ancient concept.
It points directly to what the classical and Christian traditions named the Logos.
Let's define the Logos, because it's not just a religious term, right? It has deep philosophical roots.
Very deep. Going back to Heraclitus and the Stoics, and obviously famously adopted in the Gospel of John. The Logos is the Word, the divine reason, the rational architecture through which all things were made. It is the underlying intelligibility of the entire cosmos.
So the reason our minds encounter a rational structure in the universe, the reason our math actually works, is because both our mind and the world proceed from a common rational source.
They speak the same language because they come from the same author. Human reason isn't just a biological machine that coincidentally correlates with the outside world. Reason is an active participation in the divine intelligibility of reality.
We succeed in knowing the universe because we share, as an image shares in an original, the rationality of the Logos.
Exactly. This is how the concept of the Logos fundamentally defines human existence. We are the creatures uniquely capable of recognizing the author's handwriting.
That is a staggering way to view human consciousness. So if reality is structured by this ultimate rational order, this Logos, how do we actually interact with it in our daily lives? I mean, it can't just be about doing calculus.
No, definitely not.
What does it actually look like when a human being aligns with this order, and what happens when we turn away from it?
The essay organizes this daily, lived interaction around a specific triad: light, love, and life. And we really need to unpack the mechanics of each of these because they form an unbroken circuit.
Okay, let's start with light.
Light is defined in the text as truth disclosed. It is the unveiling of what is actually real. When you perceive a truth, whether it's a mathematical truth or, say, the truth that you've been treating a friend poorly, that is the light illuminating reality for your mind.
Okay, so light is the truth hitting the mind. What is love then? Because in modern English, love is usually just like a strong feeling of affection or a romantic neurochemical rush.
Right, but in this classical framework, love is much more muscular. Love is the will's ordered movement toward that truth.
The ordered movement.
Yes, it is the right orientation of your desires toward what is genuinely good. It's not just a passive feeling, it is an active alignment.
So if light is seeing that I've been a bad friend, love is the active choice of my will to go apologize, make amends, and actually desire the good of that friendship.
Exactly, and that leads to the third part of the circuit, life.
Life being what exactly?
Life is the profound flourishing that results from this alignment. When you see the light of truth, and your love is ordered correctly toward it, the inevitable result is genuine, integrated human life. You flourish.
Think about this in your own life for a second. Think about someone who suddenly realizes that their high-stress, cutthroat corporate job is completely destroying their health and their family.
Oh yeah, that happens all the time.
That realization, that's the light, the truth is disclosed. Then they make the terrifying but active choice to step down, take a pay cut, and prioritize their children. That reordering of their desire is love.
Right.
And the result? 6 months later, their stress is gone, their marriage is healing, they feel whole. That is life. Light discloses, love orders, life flourishes.
It is a very precise ontological mechanism. But, as you asked, what happens when we break the circuit?
Right.
To understand that, we have to look at the classical view of evil. And the text relies on a very specific definition of evil that was heavily developed by thinkers like Augustine. It might surprise some modern listeners.
Right, because modern people usually imagine good and evil as two equal and opposite forces, like yin and yang. We picture a cosmic war between a dark energy and a light energy.
But the classical tradition fundamentally rejects that dualism. Evil is not a substance. It has no independent existence. The classical definition of evil is privatio boni, or a privation, or an absence of the good.
An absence of a good that ought to be there. Give us the analogies the text uses, because they make this very, very concrete.
The essay uses the examples of shadows and blindness. A shadow isn't a thing in itself. You can't, capture a shadow in a jar.
Right.
A shadow is simply the absence of light. Or think of blindness. Blindness isn't a dark substance that invades your eyeball. Blindness is the failure of the eye's teleological purpose, which is sight.
Or rust on a car. Rust isn't a new metal being added to the car. Rust is the oxidation and destruction of the steel that was already there.
Exactly. Evil is a deficiency of a due perfection. It is a wound in being. Because of this, evil is inherently parasitic. It cannot create anything original. It could only consume, distort, or deface what love has already made.
How does this apply to human behavior, though? Like, if I lie to someone, how is that a privation?
Think about what a lie actually does mechanically. A lie does not add new reality to the world. A lie actively withholds the truth that reality already contained.
Oh, I see.
Or take a more extreme example from the text. A murderer. A murderer does not create a new good. A murderer destroys an existing good, a complex, flourishing human life. Evil can only hollow out what was once whole.
It is a parasite, and I think this concept of privation totally changes how we have to think about freedom, too.
It really does.
The modern world defines freedom entirely around the concept of endless choice.
Yes, the modern paradigm is that the wider the range of options you have, the freer you are, totally regardless of what you actually choose. It's freedom as just the absolute absence of constraint.
But the classical world, in this essay, argues that this modern conception of freedom is incredibly shallow and actually leads to misery. True freedom is not the absence of determination. True freedom is the capacity to realize your nature.
To become, fully and without impediment, what you were meant to be. The text uses the example of a fish.
Let's hear it.
A fish is free in the water. It has not free on land. Its liberty doesn't consist in abolishing its aquatic nature and demanding the choice to climb a tree. Its liberty is found in the unimpeded exercise of its nature within the exact environment it was oncologically made for.
I absolutely love this analogy because modern freedom feels like standing in the middle of a massive supermarket cereal aisle with 10,000 different boxes of cereal.
Oh yeah, the paradox of choice.
You have infinite choice.
Right.
You don't have a bowl and you don't have any milk. You have maximum options, but zero actual fulfillment, which just leads to the paralysis of choice. You're starving in the cereal aisle.
The classical view says true freedom is walking out of the supermarket entirely and finding the exact environment and diet you were biologically and ontologically designed to thrive on.
Ontological alignment. When you orient your loves correctly toward genuine goods like cultivating courage, fostering deep parental love, seeking authentic communion with others, you experience true life.
Because you are swimming in the water you were designed for.
Yes. Meaning isn't just a neurochemical mood we hack with dopamine scrolling on our phones. Meaning is the structural result of pursuing genuine ends.
It is a profound shift from a freedom of choice to a freedom for excellence.
Okay, so if this alignment, this light, love, and life circuit, is the secret to individual human flourishing, what happens on a macro level? What happens to an entire civilization that decides collectively to rebel against this ontological structure?
Well, that leads us directly to the culmination of the essay, the great inversion and the fate of civilization.
To understand civilizational collapse, we really have to understand this philosophical clash the essay calls the great inversion. It is a clash between two fundamentally different ways of viewing the chain of reality. And the dominant modern worldview builds reality from the bottom up.
Walk us through that bottom-up chain step by step. Let's make sure it's clear.
So it starts at the absolute bottom with physics, just blind, interacting subatomic particles. Given enough time, physics gives rise to chemistry.
Right.
Chemistry, churning over billions of years, eventually produces biology. Biology, through the blind labor of natural selection, produces human psychology, and psychology finally produces culture, politics, and meaning.
So in this bottom-up view, matter is the only fundamental reality, and meaning is just a derivative, accidental byproduct. The mind emerges from the mindless. Matter produces meaning.
But the ontological framework, the one the essay is defending, completely reverses this chain. It argues for a top-down structure where meaning actually orders matter.
And what does that top-down chain look like?
It starts with being itself. From being proceeds the logos, the ultimate rational order we talked about.
Right.
From the logos proceeds teleology, the directed purpose and final causes of things. From teleology comes the intelligible form of human nature. And then, operating strictly within that pre-existing order, biological evolution acts as the physical mechanism to unfold that nature in time. And finally, that leads to culture.
I want to pause here and make sure this is crystal clear because it's a vital point in the text. This top-down view doesn't discard biological evolution. It doesn't say Darwin was a fraud or that evolution is fake.
Not at all. It embraces the science fully. It just repositions it.
Exactly. Evolution retains its full validity as the mechanical explanation of how physical organisms develop. It just surrenders the arrogant claim that it's the final, exhaustive explanation of all reality.
Evolution explains the how. Ontology explains the why.
Yes. Purpose doesn't magically emerge from blind function. Function is just the temporal physical expression of a purpose that was already inscribed in the nature of things.
So how does this macro-level view of reality relate to a civilization collapsing? Because we talked earlier about Gadsad warning that denying biological reality, ignoring human nature, destroys civilization. How does the text expand on that?
Well, Saad is entirely right that denying biology brings ruin. But the ontological framework universalizes his diagnosis. The essay argues that denying any level of reality, whether it's moral reality, spiritual reality, or biological reality, triggers collapse.
Why?
Because reality is a single, inextricably ordered whole. If you rebel against any part of the order, you are rebelling against the structure of reality itself. And as Saad said at the beginning, reality pushes back.
And the mechanical process of this collapse is described in the text as the accumulation of privations. Let's bring back that Augustine concept. Privation is the absence of good, a wound in being.
Think back to the idea pathogens we discussed at the start of the deep dive, the bad ideas acting like viruses. On this deeper ontological level, an idea pathogen is actually a vector of privation.
Explain that.
It is a falsehood that darkens the mind, which is a withdrawal of light. It is a disorder that misdirects human desire, which is a failure of love.
Wow. So every time a society collectively embraces a falsehood, it suffers a small, almost imperceptible darkening. Every time it elevates grievance over character or base appetite over lasting commitment, it creates a microscopic wound in its own ordering.
And these privations compound over time.
That compound like interest.
Yes.
We usually picture civilizational collapse like a sudden, massive earthquake, right? A single cataclysmic event like a meteor hitting or a sudden barbarian invasion. But the text describes it more like societal osteoporosis.
That is exactly how to envision it. Societal osteoporosis.
It's a slow, patient hollowing out of the bone, one little lie at a time. The outer shell of the civilization might look totally fine for a long time. The skyscrapers are still gleaming, the internet still works.
But the internal moral density is being lost.
Exactly. Eventually, the structure just can't support its own weight anymore, and it shatters under the slightest pressure.
A civilization hollows itself out through these accumulated privations until it can no longer see the truth, can no longer love rightly, and can no longer sustain the basic human goods it once took for granted.
So the million-dollar question: how does a civilization reverse this kind of societal osteoporosis? If the rot is that deep, can we just, vote in better politicians? Can we just pass more logically sound laws?
The essay is definitive and rather austere on this point. The renewal must be ontological before it can ever be political. You cannot fix a wound in being with a policy paper. You cannot legislate a privation out of existence.
So how does it happen?
The renewal happens exactly the way the collapse happened, one person at a time.
It happens at the level of the individual soul.
It begins when an individual person actively turns back toward the light of truth, reorders their love toward genuine objective goods, and steps back into the flourishing of life.
It's the patient re-elimination of a darkened order. You have to rebuild the civilizational bone density cell by cell, person by person. The accumulated privations of a society can only be answered by an accumulation of recovered goods.
And from that quiet, interior restoration, it eventually works outward. It heals families, it shores up local institutions, and finally, it bleeds into the broader public life.
You cannot impose this kind of order from the top down with political power. It has to grow organically from people recognizing and inhabiting their true teleological nature.
Exactly.
Wow. We have taken an absolutely massive journey today. Just to briefly recap for everyone listening, we started with the undeniable hard realities of our evolutionary programming, the fact that we aren't blank slates and that reality pushes back.
Right.
We recognize the absolute limits of biological survival to give us any kind of binding moral direction. We crossed the famous is-ought gap via the bridge of teleology, realizing that our is inherently contains our ought.
We arrived at a universe structured profoundly by the mathematical and rational logos.
And we saw that true freedom isn't paralyzing yourself with endless choices in a cereal aisle, but finding alignment with your deepest objective purpose swimming in the water you were made to swim in.
It is a breathtakingly comprehensive framework. It perfectly secures the valid insights of modern evolutionary science, but it grounds them securely in the ancient, tested wisdom of classical philosophy.
So for you, listening right now, taking this all in, the ultimate takeaway is this. Your deep-seated hunger for meaning, your visceral outrage at objective injustice, your desire for authentic love, these are not glitches in your primate brain.
No, they aren't.
They aren't just evolutionary tricks designed to make you pass on your genes. They are the receiver in your mind picking up the fundamental signal of reality. You are responding to the logos.
You are actively participating in the intelligibility of the cosmos.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, building on everything we've just discussed about the blueprint of human nature. If human nature possesses an objective ontological form that dictates our moral obligations, if the biological blueprint of what we are is what creates the rules for what we ought to do, what happens in the near future if humanity uses advanced genetic engineering and biotechnology to fundamentally alter our own biological architecture?
Oh, that is a terrifying question.
Right. If we use CRISPR to technologically revise the blueprint of the human animal, do we successfully rewrite our moral obligations? Or do we permanently exile ourselves from the water we were originally designed to swim in?
If we technologically change the is, do we destroy the ought? That might just be the defining existential question of the 21st century.
It's a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the big questions, keep seeking the light, and we will catch you next time.